Good morning, everyone. We actually started Perek Zayin a couple of weeks ago. And if you recall, I had passed out a sheet that looked like this, because this is a Perek which starts the second half of Sefer Daniel. The second half being not dreams that others had, but the dreams of Daniel himself. And we start this one, if you recall, from the beginning of the Perek with a dream which involved four different terrible visions. One was of a winged lion. The second one was a bear. The third was with ribs coming out of its mouth that it was eating. The third was a leopard with four heads. The fourth was this horrific looking animal that it just talks about how vicious this animal is. All of these different explanations, the last time we were together, we talked about 6 different approaches to these animals, everything ranging from the most classic positions of Chazal, which talk about the 4 animals being the 4 different empires of Bavel, Babylonia, Paras, Persia, Yavan, Greece, and Rome, to the idea of the 4. And this is within the works of Rabbi Yoel ben Nun, which I shared with you the last time as well, that it's really all talking about the 4 kings within the Persian Empire himself, Artaxerxes the first, Dariavish the second, Artaxerxes the second, Artaxerxes the third, and ultimately up to Dariavish the third. All of these are possibilities. And the reason all of these possibilities exist is because it's a dream. It's Ruach HaKodesh, and we're not 100% sure what it's talking about. Yeah, Barry.
How can they argue with Chazal?
They can argue with Chazal because even within Chazal, they argued among themselves.
Okay, but they don't have to stick to one of those arguments.
Actually, when it comes to the non-halachic areas, there is room for alternative interpretation as long as we accept within it, by the way, the authenticity of Tanakh. You know, the non-Jewish scholars view this as Babylonia, Mede, Persia, and the Greeks. And the reason they say the 5th of the 5, the 5th of the 4, this horrific animal with the 10 horns, ultimately has 3 horns that fall out and 1 horn with a mouth and an eye, which is where we had left off. They say that's Antiochus from the Hanukkah story. And the reason they say that is because according to them, which we reject totally, this book was written at the time of Hanukkah. It was a much later book. And so it's just describing events more or less in the past than events in the current, in the present, or the future. Yeah.
But is it fair to say that when a particular group of commentators are commenting or interpreting the dream, that there's an internal motivation for it? So, for example, Chazal is looking to see the different kinds of exiles, whereas Yoel ben Nun, aptly enough to me, is looking to localize it.
Well,
And that's very odd to me.
well, part of the challenge in all of this, and it's not fair to just do a little piece without seeing the full article of Rav Yoel ben Nun. But the reality is we don't know. So for example, if you look at the Abarbanel on this, the Abarbanel's position, while he ends with Rome, this final small horn that comes out is the papacy, is the Pope. He lived that, okay? Whereas Reb Sajagon and the Ibn Ezra view that final piece as Yishmael and the Saudis. They live that. So we see, and Rashi talks about Titus being that single horn that comes out. So there is, without a doubt, when it's open to interpretation, that people's own perspectives sometimes play a role. Yeah.
So what's peculiar to me is, this is this end of days vision that the Chazal, different members of the early Chazal want to bring to us, right? And yet Yoel ben Nun, who is contemporary, chooses to see it in its own era. He's limiting it. That's
Right.
very odd.
Well, I don't, I would say like this, this vision.
Yoel ben Nun, the
Yeah,
contemporary.
who's contemporary? There's 2, actually. Rav Meidan I also spoke about as well. Rav Meidan also views that the last of them was Alexander the Great. Interestingly. And the way they look at it is they have other visions that we see with similar pieces talking about similar people, and it's taken from a position of scholarship. Part of the challenge also is the end of days vision that Chazal saw, that for instance Rashi talks about, and we'll see it a little bit later, and the way Rashi interprets it. At one point we know he's wrong, where Rashi actually gives a calculation for the coming of the Mashiach, and so far 600 years later that date didn't come true. And the Abarbanel gives an alternative date, which is 550 years later, and that date still hasn't come true. So we see that this ambiguity of this text and of these visions give the opportunity for alternatives. There's risk within those alternatives, because also, as I mentioned, we haven't gotten into the text yet, this parak is a very big parak for the Christians, because they view, when we talk about with the pasuk we're going to start, they're talking about this person coming from the heavens as Jesus. And they're talking about this as, this is the vision of what will be the Bar Nash, okay, this human being who is from the heavens, and it's Christological to them. So we have all of these competing pieces, especially about Daniel Zion. Daniel is one of the favorite Old Testament books of the Christian church, because there's a lot of room for interpretation of their beliefs. Yeah.
Isn't that a little bit of a problem that so many of them unfortunately have different things, because it could give a little bit of credit to that, because they're coming up with theories just like our,
Yeah, but the reality is, well, first of all, let's talk about motivations of theories. Okay, their motivations, there are two issues. One is, we say up front, Shivim Panim La Torah. There are 70 facets to Torah, and there can be multiple explanations of pieces. Ultimately, when it comes to halachic interpretations, we even had multiple interpretations for halacha, but we have to come to a determination, this is the definitive, because you can't have multiple expressions of halachic pieces. So when we deal with things that are beyond the realm of halacha, we're okay with leaving those multifaceted approaches. We're okay with disagreement. And really our opportunity with that is to understand the different positions and then to find the one that speaks to us. Shivim Panim LaTorah by definition means that there's going to be disagreement. We aren't bothered. Jews aren't bothered by disagreements.
We seriously, we require it.
Right. That's part of the way, right? Part of the way we manage these kinds of things. So all of these pieces together allow for the alternatives. I think the one thing we need to understand again is the motivation behind interpretation. So if the motivation is to diminish the sanctity of the text, or to take the text in a direction which is antithetical to our beliefs, also diminishing it, whether it's Christological or it is secular, then we have problems with it, obviously. It's interesting. It's something to also understand what they're saying and why they're saying it, but we have every right, and in fact, an obligation to reject those pieces. Okay, and so I gave you those different explanations just to show you we really don't know what this vision is. And by the way, even Daniel himself left it very vague. It wasn't, he could have said, this is this and this is this. He didn't. Why he didn't? Part of it is also the nature of Tanakh, where it leaves it for lidorot, for generations to be able to interpret it differently. So I'm not bothered by some of the modern commentators. There's no doubt about it that the modern school of religious biblical interpretation, which is you find that Rav Meidan is one of the great scholars of Tanakh. He's one of the Rosh Hashivas in Yeshivat Har Etzion. Rav Yoel Ben Nun, also he's a Boger of Yeshivat Har Etzion. He was in the first group of people founding the yeshiva. He actually taught at Michlala for a while until the changeover of the Cooperman family, when they kind of made it themselves. But he's a tremendous scholar. We had the schut of having him give a shiur once here at Kins as well. Their approaches, and also the approach, by the way, of the Dat Mikra, is an approach which tries to integrate the two, try to integrate modern scholarship, and at the very same time, take it with the motivation that these are Sifrei Kodesh, these are sacred books, and we have to preserve those sacred books. We have to value the opinions that we don't agree with or that we want to offer alternatives to. And if you look, and on this one sheet, I gave you a little bit of it. If you look, Rav Meidan's piece on this chapter is found online in the virtual Beit Midrash of Yeshivat Har Etzion. You can read it there. Rav Yoel Ben Nun's piece is also found online at 929.org.il, and I gave you the links for both of those. And they're wonderful possibilities. It would be really good if it said, okay, this is this, and this is this, and this is this, just like Yosef, when he interpreted his dream, said, okay, or interpreted Paro's dream, this is what it means, but that's not what Daniel did. So if you look at Pasuk Yud Gimel, with all of those introductions to it, Pasuk Yud Gimel starts out, V'yera'u lefanecha. Actually, I'm in the wrong parak, sorry. Give me 1 second. It didn't look right. Okay. Then it says, actually, I'm going to go back a little bit. No, let's go to Yud Gimel. Let's go to Yud Gimel. There it is. Chazei havet bechezvei lilia. Now, this is another piece of the dream. And if you recall from the last time, with this kind of introduction, it is possible that Daniel had this, according to Chazal, on a different night. I saw this vision of the night, va'aru im ananei shemaya, and behold, with coming from the clouds of the sky, kivar enash atehava. There was like a person who was coming. Ve'ad atik yomaya mata. And he went up to, and he reached up to the Ancient One. The Ancient One we've talked about is a symbol of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'kadamoi hakrivuhu. And they brought him close to the Ancient One. Now, there's a number of difficulties with this. Rashi says right away, this is a description of Mashiach. Now, no matter who you say each of these animals represent, there's no doubt that these animals represent, according to Chazal, different rulers or empires that ruled the Jewish people. Okay, whether it's a small slice of history or a large slice of history, they're different pieces. Each one of these pieces come, and then at the end comes the Melech HaMashiach. The Messiah arrives. Interestingly, this word kivar enash, like a human being or like a son of man would be the literal translation, is a little bit of a problem, not a major problem, but for us, we say that this is, because it's a dream, the chaf appears, and this is the Ibn Ezra, is just like a vision. What I'm seeing looks like a man. Okay, it is a man, the way we're going to interpret it, but it looks like a man. Now, again, unfortunately, the Christians say this, that it looks like a man, but it's not really, it's Yeshu. Okay, that's why it has the chaf there. And in fact, some of the modern scholars take it, and not the Jewish scholars, and they say, looks like a man, it's referring to Michael the angel, Michael the angel. But that we don't accept. We say this is talking about Mashiach, and he comes from the sky. Now, also with that, there's the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Tzadichet Amud Aleph, which talks about Mashiach will arrive in one of two means. If we're deserving it, Mashiach will come in a miraculous fashion. If we're not deserving it, and God is sending the Mashiach to save us, the Mashiach will come on his donkey as well. So this is talking the miraculous fashion of the Mashiach. Also within this piece, if you look at it, and this is something Rav Meidan points out very strongly, and also the Dr. talks about this, this is in distinction to the way those animals came. The animals arose from the ground. Remember, we talked about the four winds and that whirlwind within the sea that was coming up, and all of a sudden came out these animals. This is more of a heavenly piece coming from above. And that's why he's coming from in the Ananei Shemaya. V'lei yehiv shalton v'ikaru malchu. And to him is going to be given the governance, the rule, and also the honor and the monarchy. V'chol amamaya umaya v'lishanaya, and all of the nations of the world. In other words, we talk about this, nations and peoples and languages. This is the way we describe the entire world. Le yifalechun. Ultimately, to him, they're going to serve. Shaltanei shaltan alam, his, I apologize, we are redoing the roof over this building. So don't worry about it. It's not, no one's mowing the lawn above us. Okay. His rule will be a rule of alam, forever. Now, we always forget this word olam in Tanakh does not mean world. Olam means forever. So his rule is going to be forever. Dilo yadei, which is not going to pass. Umalchutei delo titchabal, and his monarchy will never be destroyed. So this is the eternal. Et karit ruchi ana Daniel bego nidnei. But when Daniel saw all of this, he shook, and his body trembled. Nidnem is actually the sheath that you put a sword in. So the insides of his body were in like turmoil. V'chezvei reshi yivahalunani, and the vision that I saw just is shaking me, is making me tremble. Kirvat adchak min kamaya. And therefore I went to one of the people who was standing. Now, who are the people who are standing? Well, we've described the Atik Yamin, God, as sitting on his throne. Remember, the throne had sparks coming from it and a fiery river in front of it. That was the earlier part of the parak. So who's standing are the angels there. So Daniel, in his dream, goes over to one of the angels, V'yatziva ev emine al kol dana. And I asked him to tell me the truth about all of these things. If you remember in the davening, in the Shachar, it said, Emet v'yatziv v'nachom. Yatziv, this week's parsha, Atem nitzavim, is standing. But if you think about it, that we have the terminologies like upstanding in English, okay? Which also means truthful, somebody you can rely upon. So Yatzivam in Aramaic is truth. So I asked him to tell me the truth, to explain to me the truth out of all of this. Va'amarli, and the angel said to me, Ufishar milaya Yehodinani. I'll tell you the explanation of the things. Now what's just to note, until now, Daniel's role for the first 6 prakim in this sefer is he's the interpreter of dreams. Now he's having a dream, and he needs to turn to somebody else to interpret.
This is all happening in his dream.
This is all in his dream, all in his dream. Elaine chevata rav revata. So the angel tells him, these massive animals, de'inin arba, who were 4 of them, arba'a malchin yakumun min ara. There are going to be 4 kings who are going to come up from the land. Now, to go back to that beginning conversation, we don't translate this as 4 kings. We translate this as 4 monarchies.
That gives rise to the different interpretations.
Right. Okay. So we have to take it a little bit out of the pshat. Okay. But we are saying that these are the 4 kings on the land. Now, interestingly, there's a problem. If you remember, the 4 animals came out of the sea. And here the angel is saying they're coming off of the land. So the Malbim has a very creative response for it. And the Malbim says that actually what we're talking about, when we're talking about from the sea, it's talking about the way they started. And we're talking about, when we talk about the end of their monarchies or the end of the empires, it's when they were in on the land. But he has to reinterpret the word yikumun will arise to being, they will be taken up. They'll be taken off. To lakum, normally we think starts. Okay? Hakamat hamdina, the beginning, the establishment of the state. Hakamat hamdina, right? But also, if I can go ahead and I can take someone off of his chair, off of his throne, so I make him get up. And so the Malbim reinterprets that. The Dat Mikra takes it a little bit easier, that it could just be that this is just the language of speaking between the two, between the sea and the land. One is the vision to provide that greater whirlwind, the tornado over the waters and creation of that nature versus the reality. He says they're the four kings. Vikablun malchuta kadisha elyonin, and there will be, and vikablu malchut, in other words, they will get, we will get the sacred, or the elyon, the elevated. I'm not sure how he translates it. How do they translate it in Art Scroll?
The sacred, the high holy ones.
The holy ones, okay, and the monarchy will get the high holy ones, good. Vayachasnun malchuta ad alma, and they will inherit that forever. So you have four, and then you have us. Va'ad alam almaya, and for all generations. Adayin, but at the very same time, tzivit liyatzava al chevta reviaita. Daniel says, I wanted to understand what's going on regarding this fourth awesome animal. Tihavat shanya min kolhom, that was so different from all the rest. Now, again, we have this tzivit liyatzava. So the Mitzudat David says, I wanted to know the truth of the interpretation about this fourth. Dechila yetira, okay, who was more frightening. Shina, its teeth, the parzel, were iron. Vitifraya dinachash, and its claws were made of copper or bronze. Achla medaka, okay, it would crush and eat. Usha'ara beragla rafsa, and whatever remained, it would then trample with its feet. Now, interestingly, the Reb Sajagon explains that this imagery of the teeth and the trampling, this is referring to all of the assistants, all of the various generals and officers of these monarchies, that it's not just a question of that one monarchy, but all of the people around it. And it goes even further. Reb Sajagon says, what's being eaten, what's being crushed, what's remaining, and what's being trampled. So he says, the Giborei Yisrael, the powerful among the Jewish people, the Talmidei Chachamim, the poor people, and they're being put out into Galut. Those are the four steps that he's referring to. Ve'al Karnaya Asar Divrei Shei, and regarding those 10 horns that came out of this last beast's head, ve'achore di silkat, and another one which came out, ve'nafla min kadmam tlat, and 3 horns came out when this one horn came out, ve'karna dikain, and regarding that horn, ve'enin la, it had eyes, ufum mimalil rav revan, and it was talking a lot. V'chezva rav min chavrata, and it was more awesome than all of the rest. Now, according to the secular scholars, when they say this is Antiochus, they say this is the Antiochus from the Hanukkah story. We reject it, but this is one of the psukim which they really have an interesting piece about, because they say that what's going on here, the last one who rises is the one who's the blasphemer. the one who challenges God the most. And so they say that's Antiochus, who really tried to destroy the religion. However, Rashi says, no, that's Titus. He also blasphemed when he was destroying the Beit HaMikdash. He was a blasphemer. He was the one who's talking too much. Chazei havet v'karna diken. I saw, and that horn, avda krav im kadishim, it entered into battle with the sacred ones. V'yachlalahum, and it won. It was being triumphant. Meaning, think about it again, if I take Rashi's approach, this is Titus. Titus destroys the Beit HaMikdash. There's an element of success that one that comes out has against all the else. Ad the ata atik yomaya, until the ancient one comes, vidina yehiv, and he has a judgment likdishe elyonin regarding the most sacred of high, vizimna meta, and the time arrived, umalchuta hechesinu kadishin, and the monarchy will be inherited by the holy ones. In other words, just to take this again, I'm just going to follow Rashi's approach. The Roman Empire is going to continue. It destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. It looked like it was on top. It still looks like it's on top. Or if I'm going to take the position of Reb Sajagon, the Arab countries, the Ishmael, looks like they're on top until the time comes and God is going to say, okay, now comes the time for the Jews. Cain amar chevta reviata. This, he says, was this fourth animal. Malchu Riviaya Tahavi Ba'ara. This fourth monarchy will be in the land. Di Tisnei Min Kol Malchivata. It'll be different than any other malchut, any other monarchy before it. V'techul Kol Ara. It's going to consume all of the land. Utedushina v'tadkina, and it's going to crush, and it's going to the dashes to thresh and to crush. It's going to destroy everything in its paths. The karnaya asar mina malchuta asara malchin yakumu. And the reason it had 10 horns is there's going to be 10 kings in that malchut of this last animal. Now, this is one of the great challenges that we have, trying to identify the 10. Many of the positions of Chazal give you a list of who the 10. Nowadays, not all of those lists really tie in well with the history that we know. Sometimes those 10 may have covered 14, 15, 16 monarchies. Okay, because we didn't know about everyone. That's, for example, in the Persian Empire, that's very clear we didn't know a lot. And then the last one's going to come. He's going to be different than all the rest. Utlita malchin yahashpil, and there will be 3 monarchies. Now he's going to 3 monarchs go down. In other words, the last horn comes out, 3 horns fall down. Umilin litzad ila yimalil, and that horn, that one coming out is going to speak against God. Ulikadish elyonin yivaleh, and he's going to swallow up the Jewish people. V'yispar, and he's going to think lahashnaya zimnin v'dat. He's going to think that he's going to be able to change our holidays and our religion. V'yit yahavun biyadei, and he's going to have the power ad idan, until the time, v'idanin, and the times, uflagidan, and until half of the time. This last phrase, good. We don't know what this last phrase means, but Chazal give the following explanations. Rashi has the most classic of the explanation. Until the time, the times, and the half of the time. Okay? So what does it mean? The time is the amount of time from Yetziat Mitzrayim until the first Beit HaMikdash. 480 years. Then the time until The destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, which was another 410 years. We're at 890 years. And then half of that time, half of 890, okay, is 445 years. With me? Add it all together. And you have 1,336 years. You put that on top of the years after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. Actually, from when the destruction began, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash began 6 years before it was destroyed because the Korban Tamid, the regular daily sacrifice, was stopped because they couldn't get the animals for it. So as a result, if you take that year of when no longer could they bring the daily sacrifice was in the Jewish calendar 3922. You add 1336 to it, you have 5,258 or 5,781 and almost 82, which turns out to be the year in the secular calendar 1497. 1497, according to Rashi, was going to be the date Mashiach is told here in this pasuk. Until the times, and half of the time, that fourth animal is going to reign along the way. The Abarbanel disagrees a little bit with his calculation, and ultimately his position is that the Mashiach would be arriving in 1503. Now, the interesting thing is that's contemporaneous to when he lived. Rashi, he's predicting 300 years after his time frame. The Abarbanel, if you remember, he was exiled from Spain, 1492, went to Portugal. This is during his lifetime where he was beginning to see that Mashiach could arrive. The calculations of Mashiach, by the way, is always very, very dangerous. And we've seen that throughout history because when Mashiach doesn't arrive, the Jews are either tremendously disappointed and disillusioned because they had this hope that this would come through, or somebody comes on the scene and says, well, if nobody else is going to do it, I'll do it. And they make themselves into a false messiah. False messiahs we've had up until relatively modern times. We even have some people nowadays. Okay. Huh? Oh, yeah, there's a lot of them on the bus. Yeah. No, you have these positions even nowadays. Yeah, we had the one in Shul once who was delusional. The reality is it gets dangerous. It gets dangerous. This is one of the issues, for example, that plagued a segment of Chabad, because they had built up so much that the Rebbe had accomplished so much in his lifetime. And there were so many wonderful things the Rebbe did, they couldn't imagine an era without the Rebbe. And so they began to proclaim the Rebbe as the Melech HaMashiach. He would be the one who would be the Mashiach, and then the Rebbe dies. And as a result, when the Rebbe dies, there's a splinter group off of Chabad, which is not a tiny splinter group, but not mainstream outside of Crown Heights, that believes he's coming back and he will be the Mashiach. Now, coming back and to be the Mashiach doesn't sound like Judaism anymore. Okay. And so again, when these great disappointments occur, there's this great risk which associates with it. And that's why everyone takes these countings very, very carefully. From a pshat perspective, it could mean as simple as 2.5 days or 3.5 days until the times and a half a time, or 3.5 days. It could be anything. We really don't know what it means. Rashi wants to explain it within the context of these visions, which are talking, these are end of days visions. We have this terrible monster who represents all of the bad things that are going to happen to us. Then the Jewish people, God is going to bring the Messiah and things, the Jewish people will rise up and God will save us. Well, that's end of days. And when is the end of the days? It's going to happen in Idan v'Idanin u'Plag Idan. That's when it's happening. Yeah.
The real danger is making any such prediction.
Right. And so
Remember in Y2K, they were all predicting that the world was.
It's sort of surprised me.
yeah,
When it doesn't
so
happen, you don't look real good.
100%. And so when it doesn't happen and you don't look real good, one of the explanations, by the way, you'll sometimes find from Chazal, Shoshi a second, is they'll say, well, Mashiach should have come, but At that point, we didn't deserve it. If we, this was a time and we lost the opportunity. And we talk about that. Even the Gemara talks about it, that Mashiach was born at the time of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, does it mean that Mashiach is now thousands of years old? No, what it means is on a, not the pshat level, but it was a medrash. It isn't meant to be pshat. I think the lesson behind it is that the potential of redemption came at the moment of destruction. It wasn't like the destruction had to be for a certain amount of time. There was always the potential that we have. That's, by the way, there's where are the books? I think I have them here somewhere. Maybe I moved them in. That's one of the great pieces nowadays in religious Zionism. Okay, religious Zionism fought the approach of being passive and let's work on ourselves alone to try to raise up the level of the Jewish people, and God will bring the Mashiach, to the approach of, no, we can take a more active role and we can start rebuilding Zion. And that's, Rav Kalisher's famous piece in Drishat Zion, and his famous book about the early Zionist movement. And he says, Al yachshov choshev ki pitom yitaka b'shofar gadol v'yered Mashiach tzidkenu min hashamayim. Don't think all of a sudden, you're just sitting down one day, you're watching TV, and there's going to be a shofar blast and the Mashiach's going to come down. Rather, the Mashiach will come in natural means, because the Mashiach is a person. Mashiach is the next in line who will rule as from the Davidic dynasty. We don't believe that Mashiach is a Malach. We believe Mashiach is a Barnash, is the son of a human being. Okay, that person who is fulfilled. And then we have these even debates within Chazal. Is there one Mashiach or two? Is there a political Mashiach, Mashiach ben Yosef, and then the Mashiach ben David, who's the one of states, the statesman, the one who brings us all back ultimately. This pasuk, we can interpret it a million one ways, but the reality is we're not sure. Just on a simple level, what it says, this is going to continue until that day. That's the way we do it. But because Daniel didn't quote it as that day, and he gave this very strange terminology, we try to figure out what it means, and that's why Rashi says what Rashi says. Shoshi, you got a question?
Yeah, I think I'm just confused why this dream happened to Daniel. What's his chashivos in life? We don't hear about him in any amazing way. So Abraham doesn't have this, Yaakov, Yitzchak, Yosef, all these great figures in Torah. And here's this little guy, Daniel, who happens to be able to interpret dreams. And all of a sudden he comes up with the Mashiach. That's a biggie.
So yeah, I would say a couple of things. First of all, I would be very careful personally of saying the little guy, Daniel. He's a pretty big guy. But in addition to that, remember.
Well, I'm saying it not compared to me, but compared to the.
Okay, so remember, Daniel is one of the people who experiences the Galut. And so this is a prophecy that comes from that Galut experience. When they're in Eretz Yisrael, that's not their focus. And that's one of the great explanations of Chazal and modern approaches as well. Why don't we have a clear description of Mashiach in the Chumash? That wasn't the focus. The focus was the Melech is a Mashiach, right? Put a king, etc. Daniel is the person who's positioned to give this kind of prophecy. He's the one suffering. That's why you'll find these prophecies about Mashiach in Yechezkel. Okay, why Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, and Yechezkel, Nevi'im who lived at this time when the troubles began to beset the Jewish people, have these prophecies. So he's chosen in this because his dreams obviously have that importance. These dreams are dreams of Ruach HaKodesh, so let's not minimize them. And they are complicated dreams, which are open to that different interpretation. So I think he's getting it because he's the right time. And that's why, by the way, these Sfarim, when you talk about the books, the books, for example, if you want to know about a Jewish people in exile, you don't read Sefer Vayikra. You got to learn Sefer Vayikra. You want to learn about Jewish people in exile, so read about the books of the Jewish people in exile. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Daniel, and you see how the Jews are in exile. And you see what happens, and you see how HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves us, and you see these kind of visions. His is different because, again, unlike the books that are simple narratives, nothing's a simple narrative, but are easy reading. Daniel are these series of visions. Now, again, and I'm not giving it credence, but this is also part of the reason why the non-Jewish and Jewish biblical scholars who reject the divinity of Torah look at Daniel in a very different light, because they say it's not historical. This Daniel character is not historical. We find legends like this in the non-Jewish culture with beasts and things like that. And so it's important for them to understand the Bible because it's an important literary piece, but they don't apply to it this Kedusha we do. And by applying the Kedusha we do, that's how Daniel's not little and how the dreams are not minor. They're major, and they're part of our philosophy and our theology. I don't know if I answered it well enough, but
Well, so what I'm hearing is that the suffering, it's through the suffering of being in Gullahs, that's what can bring, in other words, the whole concept of Mashiach wasn't important.
it wasn't on the table, wasn't on the agenda of their thought, of their consciousness to the same extent. When we're in exile, we're looking to get out of exile. When we're in exile, we're looking for the hope. We're looking for the light at the end of the tunnel. That light at the end of the tunnel is always there. It shines for us when it's dark all around. Okay, and so that's where the Mashiach piece comes in. A last few psukim of the parak. Okay, excuse me. We are in pasuk right now, Chavav, V'dina Yitiv, and the judgment will sit. In other words, God will have the judgment come before him. V'shaltanei Yahadum, and the rule of this evil empire will be passed over. Lahashmada ulahovadad sofa. It will be destroyed and it will be completely lost. So what was persecuting us will be gone. Umalchuta v'shaltana urevuta di malchvat techot kol shemaya. Okay, and the rule and the governance and all the greatness, which is to all of the monarchs under the heavens, Yivat la'am kadisha elyonin, will be given to this heavenly, how did you put it before? High holy nation. Umalchute malchut alam, and it will be permanent. V'chol shel tanaya le'yifalchun v'yishtam'un. And all of the other rules will work for him and will be heard. Ad ka sofa de milta, says Daniel reports, this is the end of what I was told. Ana Daniel, I am Daniel. Sagir ayonai yivaha lunani. What I understood took my breath away. They just made me, Bahala is just this turmoil. The Ziva yishtanun alai, and my countenance was changed. Umilta belibi nitret, and this was kept in my heart. In other words, I guarded this in my heart afterwards. So what Daniel concludes this vision is with a statement that this was transformative for him. He saw in this vision that hope. He saw something. I remember we talk about, and we'll see this elsewhere, the visions of Merkava, where you have animals as part of the Merkava, the heavenly chariot, the chariot of the Mashiach, the chariot of God, the Mashiach. We talked about it way back when in Sefer Melachim, when Eliyahu Navi went up to the heavens. Okay, you have these visions, and Yechezkel talks about the chariot, he talks about the throne. These animals play a role in all of those other visions. These are those visions of the end of days, and it was something transformative for Daniel, and we're going to stop right here, and we're going to pick it up, and I'm not sure when the next shiur was going to be. We have, the question I have for everyone, do we want to do you want to do this coming Sunday, the Association Tshuva between Rosh Hashanah and Kippur? If it works for people?
Yeah.
Okay, good, yeah. Oh, it's okay for me, but the Sunday before Sukkot, I think we're gonna,
Works for me.
works for you, okay, the Sunday before Sukkot and Chol Hamoed Sukkot, I think we'll take those 2 weeks off. Yeah,
Is it